Thomas Wilson froze mid-step on the forest trail, his weathered hand gripping his walking stick until his knuckles turned white. The desperate growl he'd been tracking wasn't from a wounded coyote as he'd thought. It was a mother bear, her front paw mangled in a steel trap, three tiny cubs huddled against her side. What had been a peaceful morning walk had become a life-or-death situation for 5 souls in the clearing. Blood pooled beneath the bear's trapped paw as she looked up at Thomas, her eyes holding neither aggression nor fear, only a mother's desperate plea that transcended species. Sarah from the general store would later say it was suicide for a 72-year-old man to approach a trapped bear. Doc Miller would call it dementia. Mayor Patterson would declare it a public safety threat. "Don't move, girl," Thomas whispered, setting down his walking stick and reaching into his pocket for his Swiss Army knife, his arthritic fingers trembling. How could he save this family when he'd failed to save another 30 years ago? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Pine Ridge wasn't much to look at anymore. Once a bustling logging town nestled in the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky, it had slowly withered as jobs disappeared and young people moved away. But to Thomas Wilson, it was still home, the only one he'd ever known. Thomas lived alone in the modest 2-bedroom house he'd built with his own hands 45 years ago. The white paint had long since faded to a weathered gray, and the front porch sagged slightly on one side, much like Thomas himself. At 72, his 6-foot frame had begun to stoop, and arthritis had gnarled his once powerful hands. But his blue eyes remained clear and sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows, windows to a mind that refused to dim with age. 5 years had passed since Sarah, his wife of 43 years, had succumbed to pancreatic cancer. Each morning, Thomas still woke at 5:30 a.m., made coffee for 2, and set her mug on the kitchen table across from his own. He'd talk to her photo about the weather, about the squirrels raiding his bird feeder, about the ache in his lower back that wouldn't quit. What he never mentioned was the loneliness. "Another day above ground is a good day," he'd tell Sarah's smiling face, though some days he wasn't entirely convinced of that anymore. His children rarely visited. Jennifer, his daughter, was an emergency room doctor in Cincinnati with barely enough time to call once a month. Michael, his son, worked for some investment firm in Chicago, his life measured in quarterly reports and private school tuitions for Thomas's grandchildren, whom he'd met only twice. The last time Michael had called was 3 months ago, asking if Thomas had considered his options regarding assisted living facilities. The mailbox brought bills, advertisements, and a monthly Social Security check of $842. After Medicare supplemental insurance, property taxes, and utilities, Thomas had precisely $267 left each month for food, gas, and the medications that kept his heart pumping and his blood pressure in check. When the pharmacist said his copay had increased to $83, Thomas had quietly put back the blood pressure pills and only purchased the heart medication. Some things had to give. His sole friend in Pine Ridge was Anna Reynolds, the widow who lived in the blue house down the road. At 68, Anna brought over casseroles on Tuesdays and sometimes sat with him on the porch swing, 2 old-timers watching the world pass them by. She'd been a nurse at County General before retiring, and sometimes Thomas thought she checked his color and movements with professional eyes, though she never said as much. "You're too stubborn to die, Tom Wilson," she'd told him last week when he'd complained about his chest pain. "The good Lord ain't ready for your particular brand of ornery yet." Most days, Thomas walked 3 miles into the woods behind his property. The solitude suited him, and the forest didn't care that his flannel shirts were patched or that sometimes he talked to trees as if they were old friends. The forest, unlike people, passed no judgment. Thomas knelt beside the trapped bear, his heart pounding against his ribs like a frantic woodpecker. The mother bear's eyes never left his, dark pools reflecting pain and something else. Intelligence, understanding, perhaps. The steel trap had nearly severed her paw, the rusty teeth digging deep into flesh and bone. Illegal traps had been banned in these parts for decades, but Thomas knew some of the younger men still set them, hoping to catch valuable fur or just for the thrill of dominating something wild. "Easy now, Mama," Thomas whispered, his voice as gentle as when he'd talked to spooked horses in his youth. "I ain't gonna hurt you or your little ones." The smallest of the three cubs whimpered, a tiny sound that pierced Thomas's heart. All three were barely larger than kittens, eyes still blue and unfocused, fur downy soft. They couldn't be more than 3 or 4 weeks old. Without their mother, they'd die within days. Thomas assessed the trap. It was a heavy-duty model, the kind that took significant strength to set. His arthritic hands might not have the power to release it, but he had to try. He moved closer, inch by slow inch. The mother bear growled softly, but made no move to attack. Blood loss and pain had weakened her, but Thomas knew even a wounded bear could tear a man apart if threatened. "I'm going to help you," he said, though he knew the words meant nothing to the animal. Still, the tone seemed to soothe her. He reached for the trap's spring mechanism, his fingers trembling. The first attempt failed. The rusted metal wouldn't budge under his weakened grip. Thomas wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve and tried again, pushing with all his strength until his vision blurred from the effort. On the third try, the trap's jaws finally released with a metallic snap. The bear pulled her mangled paw free with a groan that sounded almost human. Thomas expected her to flee with her cubs, but instead she remained still, panting heavily. The wound was severe, bone visible through torn flesh, infection already setting in. She wouldn't survive long without care, and her cubs would perish with her. "You need help, Mama," Thomas said. "More than I can give you here." Making a quick decision that would change everything, Thomas removed his flannel shirt and carefully wrapped it around the bear's injured paw. She flinched but didn't resist. Then, using his walking stick for leverage, he fashioned a crude stretcher from fallen branches and the remainder of his clothing. Getting the bear onto this makeshift carrier nearly broke his back, but decades of construction work had given him techniques for moving heavy loads. The journey home took over 2 hours. Thomas had to stop every 100 yards to catch his breath, his chest burning and spots dancing before his eyes. The cubs followed uncertainly, occasionally making distressed noises that their mother answered with soft grunts. By the time Thomas's house came into view, his t-shirt was soaked with sweat, and his legs shook with exhaustion. Anna Reynolds was in her front garden when she spotted him dragging what appeared to be a body wrapped in clothing. "Thomas Wilson! What in heaven's name are you doing?" she called, hurrying toward him. When she got close enough to see the bear and cubs, she stopped dead in her tracks. "Have you lost your mind completely? That's a wild bear." "She's hurt, Anna," Thomas replied simply, as if that explained everything. "Caught in one of them illegal traps. Cubs won't survive without her." Anna stared at him, then at the injured animal. Her nurse's instincts warred with common sense. "Thomas, the ranger station would put her down, and the cubs too," Thomas cut her off. "You know they would." "Say it's protocol." Anna pressed her lips together, then sighed deeply. "Get her into your tool shed. I'll fetch my medical kit." Together, they managed to move the bear into Thomas's shed. The mother bear remained surprisingly docile, as if understanding they were trying to help. Thomas spread old blankets on the floor while Anna examined the wound. "It's bad, Thomas. She needs antibiotics, proper wound care. And what are you going to feed those cubs? They need special milk, not cow's milk." Thomas hadn't thought that far ahead. "The general store has pet formula, don't they? For orphaned puppies and such?" Anna shook her head in disbelief. "You're really planning to do this?" To nurse a wild bear and 3 cubs back to health in your tool shed? Thomas looked at the mother bear, who gazed back at him with those knowing eyes. One of the cubs had crawled onto his boot and was gnawing ineffectually at his shoelace. I can't explain it, Anna. But when I found them, when she looked at me, it was like she was asking for help, like she knew I was her only chance. He paused, his weathered face softening. Everyone deserves a second chance, don't they? Anna didn't answer immediately. She just watched as Thomas gently picked up the cub from his shoe and placed it back beside its mother. I'll get the supplies, she said finally. But Thomas, this is between us. If word gets out, it won't, Thomas promised. Not from me. 3 days after rescuing the bear family, Thomas sat on a wooden stool in his tool shed, feeding the smallest cub with a pet nursing bottle. The tiny creature suckled eagerly, its paws batting at the air. Thomas had named this one Scout for its curious nature. The other 2, Rusty and Princess, were already fed and sleeping beside their mother. "You're a hungry little fella, ain't you?" Thomas murmured as Scout drained the last of the formula. The mother bear, whom Thomas called Grace for her dignified bearing despite her injury, watched him with her cubs. Her wound was healing slowly, but the infection worried Thomas. Anna had brought antibiotics from her personal supply, explaining that they were left over from her husband's surgery. Thomas suspected she'd called in a favor from someone at the hospital, but he didn't ask questions. A car engine rumbled up Thomas's gravel driveway, an unfamiliar sound. Few people visited anymore. Thomas carefully placed Scout next to Grace and moved to the shed window. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows had parked beside his old pickup truck. "Stay quiet now," he whispered to Grace, though he doubted a bear understood the concept of hiding. 3 men exited the vehicle. The first was tall and imposing in an expensive charcoal suit that seemed out of place in Pine Ridge. The other 2 were younger, muscular men who surveyed the property with practiced eyes. Security, Thomas guessed. Or muscle. Thomas slipped out of the shed, locking it behind him, and approached the visitors. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he called, his voice sharper than intended. The suited man turned, offering a practiced smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Mr. Wilson? Thomas Wilson?" "That's me. Maxwell Crawford." The man extended a manicured hand. "CEO of Crawford Development. I believe Ms. Jenkins from my office called you last week?" Thomas vaguely recalled hanging up on a woman pitching something about property values. "Might have. Don't remember." Crawford's smile didn't waver. "No matter. I'm here to discuss an opportunity, Mr. Wilson. May we speak inside?" Thomas didn't move toward the house. "I'm comfortable right here." Something flashed in Crawford's eyes. Irritation, perhaps, but his demeanor remained smooth. "Very well. I'll be direct. My company is developing a luxury resort in this area. Pine Ridge Reserve will revitalize the local economy, bringing jobs and tourism revenue to a community that, forgive me, has seen better days." "And what's that got to do with me?" Thomas asked, though he already knew. Crawford gestured expansively. "Your property is uniquely positioned within our development area. The creek running through the back portion is essential for our golf course water features. I'm prepared to make a generous offer, well above market value." He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew an envelope, holding it out to Thomas. "I think you'll find the figure quite compelling for 16 acres and a modest dwelling." Thomas didn't take the envelope. "Not interested." Crawford's smile faltered. "Mr. Wilson, perhaps you don't understand. This project will happen with or without your cooperation. The Township Council has already approved the necessary rezoning. I'm offering you a chance to profit handsomely rather than watch property values plummet as construction surrounds you." "Still not interested?" Thomas crossed his arms. One of Crawford's men muttered something, and Crawford silenced him with a glance before turning back to Thomas. "May I ask why? Surely at your age, a sum like this could improve your circumstances considerably. Medical care, assisted living when the time comes, perhaps leaving something for your children. Thomas bristled at the mention of his age. This land's been in my family for 4 generations. I built this house with my own hands. I buried my wife in the family plot beyond those pines. You can't put a price on that, Mr. Crawford. Crawford sighed, his facade of friendliness dropping slightly. Everyone has a price, Mr. Wilson. It's just a matter of finding it. He tucked the envelope into Thomas's shirt pocket. Think it over. My offer stands for 1 week. As the men turned to leave, a soft whimper came from the direction of the tool shed. Crawford paused. Do you have a dog, Mr. Wilson? Thomas's heart raced. Something like that. Crawford studied Thomas, then glanced at the shed. Local regulations about pets, especially in proximity to a development site, can be quite stringent. Health codes, noise ordinances, complicated matters. The threat was thinly veiled. Crawford handed Thomas a business card. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. Everyone benefits when we cooperate, Mr. Wilson. After the SUV disappeared down the road, Thomas rushed back to the shed. Grace was agitated, sensing his distress. The cubs had awakened and were mewling nervously. It's all right, Thomas soothed, though he wasn't sure it was true. Thomas pulled out his cell phone, an outdated flip model Jennifer had insisted he keep for emergencies. He rarely used it, but this qualified. He dialed his daughter's number. Dad? Jennifer sounded surprised. Is everything okay? You never called during the day. I need your help, Jen, Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady. I found an injured animal in the woods, a bear with cubs. She's in my shed. Silence. Then, I'm sorry, did you say a bear? In your shed? She was caught in a trap, losing blood. Cubs are tiny, would have died without their mama. Jennifer's voice shifted to the clinical tone she used for difficult patients. Dad, you need to call animal control. Bears are dangerous, even injured ones. And what about rabies? Are you vaccinated for... I'm not calling anyone to kill her, Thomas interrupted. I just need advice on treating infection. The wound's getting worse. Dad, I treat humans, not bears. You can't keep wild animals as pets. Not a pet. I'm just helping until she can manage on her own. Jennifer sighed heavily. Dad, I'm in the middle of a shift. I have real patients waiting. Please call animal control before you get hurt or sick. Thomas's grip tightened on the phone. Your mother would have understood. Don't. Jennifer's voice hardened. Don't use Mom to manipulate me. This is about your safety. The line went quiet. Then Jennifer spoke again, softer. Look, I'm sorry. I'm worried about you, that's all. Living alone out there, and now this. Have you talked to Michael lately? Not in months, Thomas admitted. Maybe you should consider his suggestion about the assisted living community in Lexington. They have medical staff, activities. I'm hanging up now, Jen. Dad, wait. Thomas closed the phone and slumped onto his stool. Even his own daughter thought he was losing his mind. Maybe he was. What sane person brought a bear family into their shed? From her makeshift bed, Grace watched him steadily. Her eyes held no judgment, only a quiet acknowledgment of their shared predicament. Both wounded, both protecting what mattered most. Thomas reached out slowly, and for the first time, the mother bear allowed him to touch her head, his gnarled fingers gentle against her fur. Looks like it's just us against the world, old girl, Thomas whispered. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas fell into a rhythm with his unexpected guests. He woke at dawn to prepare formula for the cubs, heating it to precisely the right temperature on his ancient stove. Grace's wound was healing, the infection receding thanks to Anna's antibiotics and Thomas's diligent cleaning. The cubs grew stronger daily, their eyes fully open now, their personalities emerging. Scout remained the adventurous one, always first to explore when Thomas opened the shed door to let in fresh air. Rusty was the largest, already showing a protective streak toward his siblings. Princess was the gentlest, often falling asleep in Thomas's lap while he sat reading old Louis L'Amour novels to the bears in the afternoons. He wasn't sure they appreciated Western literature, but his voice seemed to soothe them. "You're getting attached," Anna warned one evening as she helped change Grace's bandage. "What happens when they're healed enough to leave?" Thomas had been avoiding that question. "That's the whole point, isn't it? Get them healthy so they can go back to the wild." "And you'll be able to let them go, just like that?" Anna gave him a knowing look. "I've seen how you talk to those cubs, Thomas Wilson. You're naming their grandchildren already." Thomas grunted noncommittally, but Anna wasn't wrong. These animals had filled a void in his life, given him purpose, company, something to care for that cared back in its own way. Grace now greeted him with a soft chuff when he entered the shed, and the cubs scrambled over each other to reach him. "They're wild animals," Anna reminded him gently, "no matter how tame they seem now." "I know what they are," Thomas replied, a touch defensively. "I'm not some senile old fool who thinks they're pets." Anna squeezed his shoulder. "Never said you were, Tom. But that Crawford fellow's been asking questions around town. Told Mayor Patterson he's concerned about wildlife management in the area." Thomas tensed. What's the mayor think about luxury resorts coming in? "What do you think?" Dollar signs in his eyes. "Says it'll revitalize the local economy." Translation, fill his pockets and those of his friends on the council. That night, Thomas lay awake in his bed, the windows open to catch the summer breeze. His thoughts drifted, as they often did in the quiet hours, to that rainy October night 30 years ago. He'd been celebrating his 40th birthday at the Rusty Nail with co-workers from the construction site. Too many whiskeys, too much pride to call for a ride. Sarah was 7 months pregnant with Michael then. The memories came in disjointed flashes, headlights through rain-streaked windshield, the sickening crunch of metal on metal, a child's terrified screaming. The family had been traveling home from visiting relatives, mother, father, young daughter, and a little boy. Thomas had approached the crumpled car, seen the mother's lifeless body draped protectively over her children in the back seat. The father, slumped against the steering wheel, was already gone. The girl, maybe 8 years old, was bleeding badly, whispering for her mother. And the boy, no more than 5, crying, trapped, but seemingly uninjured. Thomas had reached for his phone, dialed 911, then hesitated with his thumb over the call button. He was drunk. He'd lose his license, his job. Sarah needed him with a baby coming. In a moment of cowardice that would haunt him forever, he'd closed the phone, staggered back to his car, and driven away. The next day's newspaper reported the tragedy. Parents dead at the scene, daughter died en route to hospital from blood loss, son in critical condition but expected to survive. Thomas had been physically sick when he read it, realizing the girl might have lived if help had arrived sooner. From that day forward, he'd stopped drinking entirely. When the boy, Maxwell Sawyer, the paper named him, was released from hospital to foster care, Thomas began making anonymous donations to his care fund. Over the years, Thomas tracked the boy's progress from afar, sending money for school supplies, summer camps, eventually college. Sarah knew only that Thomas was helping a charity case. The donations continued until Maxwell turned 21 and vanished from the system, presumably having changed his name and moved away. Thomas had never confessed his role in the accident to anyone. The isolated rural road, the storm, the late hour. No witnesses had come forward. The case was eventually classified as a hit and run, the perpetrator never identified. Now, lying in his bed 3 decades later, Thomas wondered if his care for the Bear family was some subconscious attempt at atonement. Save these cubs to make up for the children he'd harmed? The thought brought no comfort. A sound outside interrupted his dark reminiscence, a vehicle moving slowly past his house, engine muted. Thomas rose stiffly and peered through the window. A dark SUV crept along the road, headlights off. As it passed under the moonlight, Thomas recognized it as Crawford's. Alarm shot through him. He pulled on pants and boots, grabbed his shotgun from the closet, and hurried outside. The SUV had stopped at the edge of his property. Thomas moved quietly along the tree line until he was within earshot, keeping to the shadows. 2 men emerged from the vehicle. Crawford wasn't one of them, but Thomas recognized his security detail from their previous visit. They carried something between them that glinted in the moonlight. "Boss says, put it near the shed," one man muttered. "Make it look like an accident." Thomas stepped forward, shotgun raised. "That's far enough, boys." The men froze. One dropped his end of what Thomas now saw was a steel trap similar to the one that had injured Grace. "Mr. Wilson," the taller man said smoothly, "there's been a misunderstanding." "Seems pretty clear to me," Thomas replied, his fingers steady on the trigger guard. "You're trespassing with intent to harm." The shorter man took a step backward. "We're just following orders, old man. Crawford wants you gone, one way or another." "Tell Crawford if he sets foot on my property again, he'll be leaving in an ambulance." Thomas pumped the shotgun for emphasis, the sound cracking through the quiet night. "Now get that trap and yourselves off my land." After the men retreated, Thomas checked the shed. Grace was awake, alert to the disturbance. The cubs slept soundly against her side. Thomas pulled a lawn chair in front of the shed door and settled in for the night, shotgun across his lap. He wouldn't be sleeping anyway. Dawn brought Anna hurrying across the yard, still in her bathrobe. "Thomas, are you all right? Marvin down at the gas station said Crawford's men were bragging about teaching you a lesson last night." Thomas recounted the confrontation while Anna's expression darkened. "You need to call the sheriff," she insisted. "And say what? They'll claim they were just hiking, got lost? Besides, Sheriff Daniels plays poker with the mayor every Thursday. You think he'll cross Crawford?" Anna couldn't argue with that. Pine Ridge law enforcement had always favored those with influence. "At least call your son," she suggested. "Michael works with investment types, doesn't he? Maybe he knows someone who could put pressure on Crawford's company." Thomas snorted. "Michael wouldn't piss on me if I was on fire." "Thomas Wilson, language!" Anna scolded automatically, then sighed. "Your children care about you, they just don't understand you." "There's a lot they don't understand," Thomas muttered. Nevertheless, after Anna left, Thomas found himself dialing Michael's number. It went to voicemail twice before his son finally answered on the third attempt. "Dad?" Michael sounded irritated. "I'm heading into a meeting. Can this wait?" "Got a problem here," Thomas said, skipping pleasantries. "Developer wants my land, getting aggressive about it." "Crawford Development?" Michael asked, surprising Thomas. "I got your certified letter yesterday." "What letter?" "The buyout offer, 3 times market value for your property. I assumed you'd ask them to copy me since I handle your affairs." Thomas gripped the phone tighter. "I never got any letter, and I sure as hell never asked them to contact you." Silence hung on the line for a moment. "Dad, be reasonable. This is a fantastic offer. You're sitting on worthless mountain property that suddenly somebody wants to pay real money for. You could move somewhere with proper health care, activities for seniors. I'm not selling my home so you can stick me in some warehouse for old folks," Thomas snapped. "It's not a warehouse, it's a premium retirement community. Jennifer and I looked into Cedar Pines in Lexington. They have doctors on staff, organized outings, and you two wouldn't have to worry about checking on the old man anymore. Is that it? Just ship me off to die among strangers?" Michael's voice cooled. "That's not fair. We're trying to do what's best for you." "Best for me or convenient for you?" Dad, you're being irrational. You're 72, living alone in a deteriorating house miles from proper medical care. What happens when you fall? When you can't drive anymore? Jennifer says your heart condition. My heart's just fine, Thomas lied. And my mind too, despite what you and your sister seem to think. Is this about Mom? Because she's gone, Dad. She wouldn't want you clinging to that empty house instead of living your remaining years comfortably. Thomas closed his eyes, fighting for control. You don't know the first thing about what your mother would want. I know she worried about you being alone up there, and now, with all this bare nonsense Jennifer mentioned, I'll handle Crawford my way, Thomas cut in. Just wanted you to know what's happening in case anything happens to me. Michael's tone shifted, concerned despite himself. What does that mean? Has this developer threatened you? Goodbye, Michael. Thomas hung up, his hands shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. He shouldn't have called. What had he expected? That his son would drop everything to help him? Michael had made it clear years ago that his father was an obligation, not a priority. Inside the shed, the bears were restless, picking up on Thomas's agitation. Grace huffed softly, her dark eyes following him as he paced the small space. Scout attempted to climb Thomas's leg, and despite his dark mood, he found himself smiling at the cub's determination. "You're quite the fighter, aren't you?" Thomas murmured, lifting Scout to eye level. "Don't give up easy." The cub batted at Thomas's nose with a tiny paw, and suddenly Thomas felt a resolve hardening within him. He wouldn't let Crawford win, not just for his own stubborn pride, but for these creatures who depended on him, for the family he'd failed to save 30 years ago, for Sarah, who had believed there was still good in him despite everything. Thomas set Scout down and reached for his phone again, this time dialing a number he hadn't called in years. "Martinez Legal Services," a crisp female voice answered. "Need to speak with Eduardo," Thomas said. "Tell him it's Thomas Wilson from the Pine Ridge Development Project, 1998. A minute later, a familiar voice came on the line. "Thomas? Dios mío, it's been what, 15 years? At least." "How's retirement treating you?" Eduardo Martinez chuckled. "Boring as hell. My wife has me growing tomatoes." "Tomatoes, Thomas. Me, who used to make corporate lawyers sweat through their $1,000 suits." Thomas smiled despite himself. Eduardo had been the fiercest environmental attorney in 3 states before retiring. They'd worked together decades ago, stopping a mining operation that would have poisoned Pine Ridge's water supply. "I need your help, old friend," Thomas said. "Got a situation with a developer, Crawford Development." "Maxwell Crawford?" Eduardo's tone sharpened with interest. "I've been following his projects. Man's got a reputation for cutting corners on environmental impact assessments." Thomas explained the situation, the bears, the threats, the pressure tactics. "Classic intimidation playbook," Eduardo mused. "But they've made mistakes, Thomas. Trespassing, attempted wildlife endangerment, and if they're building near water sources, I guarantee corners are being cut on environmental studies. Can you help? For you? Of course. I'll make some calls, pull some records." Eduardo paused. "But Thomas, be careful. Crawford isn't just wealthy, he's connected. Politicians, judges, even some conservation groups take his donations, and there's something personal about him. He doesn't just build, he destroys what was there before, like he's settling scores with the land itself." After hanging up, Thomas felt lighter than he had in days. Eduardo might be retired, but his network remained intact. For the first time since Crawford appeared, Thomas felt a flicker of hope. That afternoon, Thomas sat with Grace while the cubs napped. The mother bear's wound had almost fully healed, though she still favored her right paw. Soon they would be ready to return to the forest. The thought brought an unexpected pang of loss. "You've been good company," Thomas told Grace softly, running a gentle hand over her head. To his surprise, she leaned into his touch slightly, a gesture of trust that tightened his throat. Thomas's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Anna. "Turn on local news now." Thomas hurried inside to the small television he rarely used. The Pine Ridge Community Channel showed Mayor Patterson at a press conference, Crawford standing confidently beside him. "Proud to announce that Pine Ridge Resort will break ground next month," the mayor was saying. "This project represents a watershed moment for our community, bringing jobs and prosperity back to our town." Crawford stepped to the microphone, his perfect smile gleaming. "We're committed to making Pine Ridge Resort not just a luxury destination, but a model of sustainable development. Our plans include a wildlife conservation area that will preserve the natural beauty that makes this region special." A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Crawford, what about environmental concerns? There are protected species in those woodlands." Crawford nodded solemnly. "Excellent question. We've conducted thorough environmental impact studies and are working closely with state wildlife officials. In fact," his expression grew concerned, "we've recently received reports of a black bear with cubs being held in captivity by a local resident. This represents a serious danger both to the bears and the individual. We're coordinating with authorities to ensure these animals are properly relocated." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. Crawford had outmaneuvered him, painting himself as the wildlife advocate and Thomas as the threat. The reporter followed up. "Can you identify this resident?" Crawford hesitated artfully. "I'd rather not name names at this stage. Our concern is for the well-being of the animals and the elderly gentleman in question, who may not fully understand the danger he's placed himself in." The implication was clear: a confused old man endangering protected wildlife. Thomas turned off the TV, his hands shaking with fury. His phone rang almost immediately. "Eduardo." "I saw it," Thomas said before his friend could speak. "He's setting you up, Thomas. Making you look like a dangerous crank before you can oppose him publicly." "What do we do?" "We fight fire with fire. I've been digging into Crawford's past. There's something off about him. His records only go back about 20 years. Before that, different name, different identity. I'm still connecting dots, but..." A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas glanced out the window and saw a Pine Ridge Sheriff's Department cruiser in his driveway. "Gotta go, Ed. Sheriff's here." "Don't say anything without a lawyer, Thomas." "I mean it." Thomas pocketed the phone and opened the door to find Sheriff Daniels on his porch, looking uncomfortable in his too-tight uniform. "Afternoon, Thomas," the sheriff said, removing his hat. "Mind if I come in? Got a matter to discuss?" Sheriff Daniels shifted his weight awkwardly in Thomas's living room, his eyes darting around the modest space. Thomas had offered him coffee, more out of habit than hospitality, which the sheriff declined with a nervous shake of his head. "So," Thomas broke the uncomfortable silence, "what brings Pine Ridge's finest to my doorstep?" Daniels cleared his throat. "Thomas, we've known each other 30 years. I'd like to handle this informally." "Handle what exactly?" "Got a report you're keeping wildlife on your property. Black bear and cubs." Daniels glanced toward the window that faced the tool shed. "State law is pretty clear about harboring dangerous animals without proper licensing." Thomas kept his expression neutral. "That's so?" "Crawford Development filed a formal complaint. Says you're endangering yourself and potentially others. They've brought in state wildlife officials, Thomas." "This isn't just going to blow over." "Since when does Maxwell Crawford care about wildlife?" Thomas asked. "Man's built his fortune paving over forests." Daniel sighed. "Look, Thomas, I don't have a dog in this fight. Mayor's on my back, and Crawford's got the town council eating out of his hand with promises of tax revenue. I'm just trying to keep this from escalating. By coming to my home with accusations based on hearsay, It's not hearsay if it's true, Daniels said pointedly. Is it true, Thomas? Thomas considered his options. Lying would only delay the inevitable. I found an injured bear in a trap, illegal trap, by the way. She's got cubs that would die without her. I've been treating her wound until she can fend for herself. Daniels removed his hat and ran a hand through thinning gray hair. Jesus, Thomas, a full-grown black bear? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? She's not dangerous, not to me anyway. Bears are unpredictable, Thomas. One swipe of those claws could kill you. Daniels leaned forward. I can help you out here. Let me call State Wildlife Services. They'll relocate the bears somewhere safe, away from the development area. Thomas shook his head firmly. They'll euthanize Grace and put the cubs in some zoo. That's not helping. Grace? You named a wild bear? Daniels looked genuinely concerned now. Thomas, I say this as a friend. Since Sarah passed, you've been different, isolated. Maybe this situation with the bears is, I don't know, filling some void? Thomas felt a flare of anger. Don't psychoanalyze me, Bill. I'm not some lonely old fool who's lost his mind. I know exactly what I'm doing and why. Then explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, you're risking your life and breaking multiple laws for animals that belong in the wild, not your tool shed. Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking toward the shed where Grace and her cubs rested. How could he explain the connection he felt? The sense of purpose that had been missing since Sarah died? Have you ever done something so wrong you know you can never make it right? Thomas asked quietly. Something that haunts you every day for decades? Daniels frowned. What are you talking about? Thomas turned to face the sheriff. 30 years ago, there was a car accident on Route 16. Family of 4, parents and a little girl died. Boy survived. Daniels' expression shifted from confusion to recognition. The Sawyer family. Hit and run. Never solved. His eyes narrowed. Thomas, what are you saying? I was the other driver, Thomas said, the confession feeling both terrible and liberating. I'd been drinking at the Rusty Nail. My birthday. Hit them head-on in the rain. I got out, saw them, and His voice broke. I left them there, Bill. The girl might have lived if I'd called for help right away. Daniel stared at him, shock evident on his weathered face. Why are you telling me this now after all these years? Because it's time for the truth. I've lived with this secret long enough. Thomas's hands trembled slightly. Helping these bears won't bring that family back or make up for what I did. But maybe it's a start. The sheriff sat heavily on the couch. Thomas, I don't know what to say. There's no statute of limitations on vehicular homicide. I know that. And you know I'm an officer of the law. I have a duty to report this. Thomas nodded. Do what you have to do, Bill. But let me get these bears safely back to the wild first. They're innocent in all this. Before Daniels could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching drew their attention. Through the window, Thomas saw 3 SUVs pulling into his driveway, Crawford's black vehicle flanked by 2 white vans marked with the State Wildlife Department logo. They're here, Daniels said grimly, standing. I didn't call them, Thomas. This isn't my doing. I know. Thomas grabbed his shotgun from beside the door. Don't make this worse, Daniels warned, placing a restraining hand on Thomas's arm. There are better ways to handle this. Thomas reluctantly set the shotgun down as Maxwell Crawford emerged from his vehicle, followed by 2 men in wildlife service uniforms and Crawford's security detail. Stay here, Thomas told the sheriff, stepping onto his porch to meet the unwelcome visitors. Crawford approached with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Mr. Wilson, I see Sheriff Daniels has already informed you of the situation. The situation being you trespassing on my property again? Thomas replied coldly. Crawford smiled thinly. I've brought representatives from the State Wildlife Department. They have a court order to inspect your property and remove any dangerous animals being illegally kept. One of the uniformed men stepped forward, holding out an official-looking document. Sir, we have reports of an adult black bear and cubs being held in captivity. We're authorized to seize these animals for their safety and yours. Thomas didn't take the paper. Those bears were injured by an illegal trap. I've been rehabilitating them. Are you a licensed wildlife rehabilitator, sir? The official asked. You know I'm not. Then you're in violation of state law. Black bears are protected species. Only authorized personnel may handle or treat them. Crawford's expression was one of manufactured concern. Mr. Wilson, we understand you had good intentions. No one's suggesting otherwise. But these animals need professional care. Thomas felt the situation slipping away from him. What will happen to them? The wildlife officer hesitated. The cubs will be assessed for potential rehabilitation and release. The mother will be euthanized, Thomas finished, because once a bear associates with humans, you consider it a threat. That's standard protocol, yes, the officer admitted. I won't let you kill her. Thomas stood his ground, blocking the path to the shed. She's not dangerous. She's a good mother trying to protect her young. Crawford stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mr. Wilson, this doesn't have to be difficult. Sign over your property to me at the agreed price, and I'll ensure these bears are relocated to a private sanctuary, not euthanized. I have connections the state doesn't. Thomas stared at him, realization dawning. This was never about the resort, was it? Or the bears? This is personal for you. Something flickered in Crawford's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or wariness. I don't know what you mean. Before Thomas could respond, Sheriff Daniels emerged from the house. Mr. Crawford, I'd like to see that court order. While the sheriff reviewed the document, Thomas studied Crawford more closely. The man was in his mid-30s, with dark hair and intense eyes that suddenly seemed familiar. A cold realization washed over Thomas. The timing would be right. The boy from the accident, Maxwell Sawyer, would be about Crawford's age now. It's you, Thomas whispered, the blood draining from his face. You're the boy from the accident, Maxwell Sawyer. Crawford's carefully composed expression faltered for just a moment, but it was enough to confirm Thomas's suspicion. I don't know what you're talking about, Crawford said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sheriff Daniels looked up from the court order, glancing between the two men with growing understanding. The paperwork's in order, Thomas. They have legal authority to seize the animals. At that moment, a commotion erupted from the direction of the tool shed. One of Crawford's security men had approached the structure and was attempting to peek through a gap in the wooden slats. Grace's warning growl rumbled across the yard, followed by frightened cries from the cubs. Thomas moved without thinking, rushing toward the shed. "Leave them alone!" The security guard backed away, hand moving beneath his jacket. "The bear's aggressive. It needs to be put down." "She's protecting her cubs from strangers," Thomas shouted. "Back off and she'll calm down." Crawford signaled to his men. "Secure the old man. Wildlife officers, proceed with extraction of the animals." Two security guards grabbed Thomas's arms, restraining him as he struggled. "You can't do this. She's not dangerous." "Enough." Crawford's voice cut through the chaos. "For 30 years I've wondered who left my family to die that night. Who drove away while my sister bled to death in the back seat. I hired investigators, searched records, followed every lead until finally—" He gestured around at Thomas's property. "I found you." A hushed silence fell over the group. The wildlife officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sheriff Daniels stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Crawford, if you have evidence regarding an unsolved vehicular homicide that needs to be handled through proper channels." Crawford's laugh was bitter. "Proper channels? In Pine Ridge? where the local authorities couldn't even identify a drunk driver who killed 3 people? He turned to Thomas. I built my entire life around finding you. Changed my name, acquired wealth and influence, all to track down the coward who left a 5-year-old boy alone with his dead family. Thomas didn't resist the guards holding him. You're right about everything. I was a coward. I've lived with that shame every day since. Shame. Crawford spat the word. You think shame is punishment enough? Nothing is punishment enough, Thomas said quietly. I can never make it right, but I can stop running from it. He looked at Sheriff Daniels. Bill, I confess to leaving the scene of the accident that killed the Sawyer family, to driving under the influence and vehicular homicide. I'll sign whatever statement you need. Daniels looked genuinely pained. Thomas, it's time, Thomas interrupted. But please, let me get these bears safely back to the wild first. They deserve that chance. A sudden movement caught everyone's attention. The tool shed door, apparently not properly secured, swung open. Grace appeared in the doorway, her massive form silhouetted against the shadowy interior. Behind her, the 3 cubs peered out curiously. Stay back, one of the wildlife officers warned, reaching for his tranquilizer gun. But instead of charging, Grace emerged slowly, cautiously. Her dark eyes surveyed the group, lingering on Thomas. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she approached him, ignoring the guards still gripping his arms. Don't move, Crawford ordered his men, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the bear drew nearer. Grace stopped directly in front of Thomas. She rose slightly on her hind legs, not in aggression, but as if to see his face better. For a long moment, bear and man looked at each other. Then Grace dropped back to all fours and turned to Crawford, studying him with the same intensity. Jesus Christ, one of the guards muttered, releasing Thomas and backing away. No one spoke. No one moved. The bear's behavior defied all protocols, all expectations. Grace returned to her cubs, nudging them gently back into the shed, then looked once more at the humans, as if waiting. Thomas broke the silence. She understands more than you think. She knows who's trying to help and who means harm. Crawford stared at the bear, then at Thomas, his expression a complicated mixture of anger, confusion, and something else, perhaps awe. This doesn't change anything, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe not, Thomas agreed, but it changes how we handle this next part. The standoff at Thomas's property stretched into uncomfortable silence. Grace and her cubs had retreated into the tool shed, but the mother bear remained visible in the doorway, watchful. The wildlife officers exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unprepared for an animal that behaved more like a guardian than a threat. Sheriff Daniels broke the tension first. Let's everybody take a step back and breathe. No need for rash decisions here. Crawford's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly to his security detail, who released Thomas's arms. This changes nothing about your confession, Wilson. You admitted to leaving my family to die. I did, Thomas acknowledged, rubbing his wrists where the guards had gripped him. And I'll face whatever consequences come from that, but these bears are innocent. The senior wildlife officer, Johnson, according to his nameplate, stepped forward cautiously. I've never seen behavior like that in a wild bear. It's unusual. She trusts me, Thomas said simply. I've been caring for her and her cubs for nearly 3 weeks now. Her wound is almost healed. Johnson frowned. Wild bears shouldn't trust humans, Mr. Wilson. That's the problem. Once they lose their fear of people, they become dangerous. Thomas shook his head. Grace is different. Look at her. She's watching us, assessing the situation. She's not aggressive unless threatened. Crawford scoffed. You're anthropomorphizing a wild animal, giving it human qualities it doesn't possess. Am I? Thomas challenged. Or are you underestimating the intelligence and emotional capacity of a creature you've never bothered to understand? A car door slammed in the driveway, drawing everyone's attention. Eduardo Martinez emerged from a dusty Subaru, legal briefcase in hand, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. Despite being in his 70s, he moved with purpose, shoulders squared beneath his rumpled suit. "Gentlemen," Eduardo called, approaching the group, "I hope I'm not interrupting. Eduardo Martinez, attorney for Mr. Wilson." Crawford's eyes narrowed. "Martinez? The environmental lawyer?" "Retired, technically," Eduardo smiled, "but making an exception for my old friend." He turned to the wildlife officers. "May I see this court order, please?" While Eduardo reviewed the document, Thomas noticed another vehicle pulling in, Anna's blue sedan. She hurried toward them, medical bag in hand, concern etched on her face. "Thomas, are you all right?" she called. "Fine, Anna," Thomas assured her. Eduardo handed the court order back to Johnson. "This order authorizes inspection and potential removal of dangerous wildlife. However, it does not specify euthanasia as the required outcome." "Standard protocol," Johnson began. "Is not law," Eduardo finished firmly. "Furthermore, I've been in touch with Dr. Rebecca Forrester at the University of Kentucky's Wildlife Conservation Center. Now, she's quite interested in this case, particularly in documented instances of bears showing unusual levels of trust and interaction with humans." Johnson hesitated, clearly recognizing the name. "Dr. Forrester heads the Black Bear Rehabilitation Program." "Indeed," Eduardo nodded. "She's prepared to oversee these bears' rehabilitation personally, provided they can be transported safely to her facility." Crawford stepped forward, voice tight with controlled anger. "This man has confessed to a 30-year-old homicide. His opinions on wildlife management are irrelevant." Sheriff Daniels sighed heavily. "Mr. Crawford, I understand your personal stake in this, but these are separate issues. The bears are not separate." Crawford's composure cracked. "Nothing about this is separate. This man," he jabbed a finger at Thomas, "destroyed my entire family, then lived free for 30 years while I grew up alone in foster homes. Now he's found a new family to care for, and you're all falling for his act." Thomas flinched at the raw pain in the younger man's voice. Every word was true. He had destroyed this boy's life, then continued his own as if he deserved happiness. "You're right," Thomas said quietly. "I don't deserve compassion or understanding. What I did was unforgivable." Crawford stared at him, momentarily thrown by the agreement. "But these bears do deserve a chance," Thomas continued. "Your parents, your sister, they were innocent victims of my cowardice. So are Grace and her cubs. Don't punish them for what I did." Anna stepped forward, addressing Crawford directly. "Young man, I can't imagine your pain. To lose your family so young in such a terrible way, no child should endure that." Her voice was gentle but firm. "But I've known Thomas for 40 years. The man who fled that accident isn't the same man standing before you today." Crawford laughed bitterly. "People don't change that much, don't they?" Anna challenged. "The Thomas I knew 30 years ago was indeed a hard-drinking, self-centered man, but after that night, something broke in him. He stopped drinking entirely, started donating half his paycheck to some charity he never named, worked himself to exhaustion providing for his family as if trying to make up for something." Thomas looked at her sharply. "You knew?" Anna's expression softened. "I suspected. Small towns have long memories, Thomas. The timing of the accident, your sudden change, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. But it wasn't my place to confront you." "All very touching," Crawford said coldly. "But it doesn't change facts. He killed my family and ran away. Now he's confessed, and justice needs to be served." Sheriff Daniels nodded soberly. "It does. But justice and vengeance aren't the same thing, Mr. Crawford. Thomas will face charges for his actions. That doesn't mean these bears need to suffer. From the shed doorway, Grace huffed softly, as if understanding she was the subject of debate. The cubs peered around her legs, curious but cautious. Eduardo seized the moment. I propose a compromise. Dr. Forrester can be here by tomorrow morning with a proper transport team. The bears go to her facility for rehabilitation and eventual release in a protected area. Thomas surrenders himself to face the legal consequences of his past actions, and Mr. Crawford's development plans proceed without this particular property included. Why should I compromise? Crawford demanded. I hold all the cards here. Do you? Eduardo raised an eyebrow. Because while reviewing this situation, I discovered some concerning irregularities in your environmental impact statements for Pine Ridge Resort, particularly regarding watershed protection and endangered bat habitat. The EPA tends to take a dim view of such oversights. Crawford's expression hardened. That's blackmail. That's leverage, Eduardo corrected mildly. We all want different things from this situation. A compromise allows everyone to get something they need, if not everything they want. Sheriff Daniels looked relieved at the potential resolution. Sounds reasonable to me. Johnson nodded. If Dr. Forrester's willing to take the case, that would be an acceptable outcome from our department's perspective. All eyes turned to Crawford, whose face revealed an internal struggle. Finally, he looked directly at Thomas. I want to hear you say it, all of it. What happened that night? Why you left us there? I deserve to know. Thomas nodded, throat tight. You do. He took a deep breath, then recounted every terrible detail. The birthday celebration, the whiskey, the rain-slicked road, the horrific collision, the sight of the crushed car, the mother's body draped protectively over her children, the decision to flee rather than face consequences. Your sister was still alive? Thomas finished, voice breaking. If I'd called for help immediately, she might have survived. That knowledge has haunted me every day for 30 years. Crawford listened in rigid silence, his face pale. When Thomas finished, the younger man turned away, shoulders trembling with suppressed emotion. You said you tried to track the boy, me, afterward, Crawford said finally, not turning around. Why? Because I owed you more than I could ever repay, Thomas answered simply. I made anonymous donations to your care fund until you turned 21 and disappeared from the system. It wasn't enough. Nothing would be enough. But it was all I knew how to do. Crawford turned back, eyes glistening with unshed tears. The mystery benefactor, every Christmas, every birthday. I always wondered who... He stopped, collecting himself. I spent my entire adult life hunting you, building wealth and power for the sole purpose of finding the faceless monster from that night. And now you've found me, Thomas said quietly. And you're just an old man, Crawford replied, an odd note in his voice, not quite disappointment, not quite relief. From the shed, Grace made a soft, chuffing sound, drawing their attention. The mother bear stood protectively over her cubs, watching the humans with intelligent eyes. Crawford stared at the bear family for a long moment, then at Thomas. Something shifted in his expression, not forgiveness, perhaps, but recognition. I'll accept your lawyer's compromise, he said finally. The bears go to Dr. Forrester. You face justice through proper channels, and I'll reconsider certain aspects of the development plan. Thomas nodded, a weight lifting from his chest despite the uncertain future ahead. Thank you. Don't thank me, Crawford said stiffly. I'm not doing this for you. As Crawford walked back to his vehicle, Thomas understood. The younger man wasn't acting out of mercy toward Thomas, but out of reluctance to become the same kind of person who had destroyed his family, someone who valued vengeance above all else. It wasn't forgiveness, but perhaps it was the beginning of healing for them both. The next morning arrived with a pale, golden light that spilled across Thomas's yard, illuminating dewdrops on tall grass he hadn't had the energy to mow. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying Crawford's words, the revelation of identities, the uncertain fate that awaited both him and the bears he'd come to love. Thomas sat on his porch steps, coffee mug warming his gnarled hands, watching the tool shed where Grace and her cubs slept. In just a few hours, Dr. Forrester would arrive to transport them to her facility. Though Eduardo had assured him it was the best possible outcome, Thomas couldn't help the hollow feeling spreading through his chest. Another goodbye, another loss. "You're up early," Anna called, crossing from her property with a covered dish in hand. "Brought you some breakfast. Figured you might not feel like cooking today." Thomas attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks." Anna settled beside him on the steps, her knee creaking as she lowered herself. "Quite a day yesterday." "That's one way of putting it," Thomas agreed dryly. "Have you heard from Jennifer or Michael?" Thomas nodded. "Sheriff Daniels called them both after he took my statement. Jennifer's driving down today. Michael's," he shrugged, "handling things from Chicago, setting up a lawyer." Anna placed a comforting hand on Thomas's arm. "What you did took courage, Thomas. Owning up after all these years." "Should have done it 30 years ago," Thomas replied, staring into his coffee. "That would have been courage. This was just inevitability." From inside the tool shed came the familiar sounds of cubs awakening, playful growls and squeaks as they tumbled over each other. Despite everything, Thomas smiled. Those sounds had become the highlight of his days. "I should feed them one last time," he said, rising stiffly. Inside the shed, the scene was familiar yet poignant with finality. Grace greeted him with a soft chuff, her intelligent eyes studying his face as if sensing his sadness. The cubs bounded toward him, Scout climbing onto his boot with practiced ease, Rusty playfully batting at his pant leg, Princess hanging back slightly, watching with curious eyes. "Last breakfast, little ones," Thomas murmured, preparing their formula. "You're going to a better place. Someone who knows how to prepare you for the wild properly." As he fed each cub, Thomas found himself talking, words flowing more freely to these animals than they ever had to humans. "You know, I never told my own children the truth," he confessed to Grace as she watched him tend to Scout. "Thought I was protecting them, but really, I was protecting myself. Afraid they'd look at me the way Crawford did yesterday, like I was a monster." Grace tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. "The thing is," Thomas continued, "I never felt I deserved their love after what I did, so I kept them at arm's length, focused on providing, not connecting. By the time Sarah got sick, the distance was too great to bridge." Princess climbed into his lap, curling up with complete trust. Thomas stroked her fur gently. "Maybe that was my real punishment all these years. Not guilt or shame, but isolation. Building walls so thick even my own family couldn't breach them." A vehicle approaching interrupted his monologue. Thomas carefully returned Princess to Grace's side and went outside to find a University of Kentucky van pulling up beside a silver sedan. Jennifer's car. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. Dr. Forrester emerged from the van, a tall woman with practical clothes and a no-nonsense ponytail, followed by 2 assistants with specialized transport cages. Jennifer stepped from her sedan simultaneously, looking both exhausted and alert, her doctor's training evident in her measured movements. Father and daughter locked eyes across the yard. Thomas felt suddenly exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. What had Sheriff Daniels told her exactly? How much did she know? Jennifer approached him directly, her expression unreadable. "Dad." "Jen," Thomas replied, uncertain whether to embrace her. They settled for an awkward moment of eye contact before Dr. Forrester broke the tension. Mr. Wilson, Rebecca Forrester, I understand you've been caring for an injured mother bear and 3 cubs? Thomas nodded, grateful for the diversion. They're in the shed. The mother, Grace, had her paw caught in an illegal trap. It's mostly healed now, but she still favors it. Dr. Forrester's professional demeanor softened slightly. You named her? Seemed wrong not to, Thomas replied simply. While Forrester's team prepared for the transfer, Jennifer pulled Thomas aside, her voice low and controlled. Sheriff Daniels told me everything, Dad. About the accident 30 years ago, about Crawford. Thomas braced himself for judgment, anger, disgust. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. That's not... Jennifer stopped, frustration flickering across her face. Dad, Mom told me about the accident years ago before she died. Thomas stared at her, stunned. Sarah told you? Jennifer nodded, eyes glistening. She made me promise not to mention it unless you brought it up first. Said you needed to come to terms with it in your own way. She knew? Thomas's voice cracked. All those years? Of course she knew, Dad. She was your wife. She noticed when you stopped drinking overnight, when you started sending money to some anonymous recipient every month, when you withdrew from everyone, including your own children. Thomas felt dizzy, decades of carefully maintained secrecy crumbling around him. Why didn't she say anything? She tried, in her way, but you shut down whenever she got close to the subject. Jennifer's expression softened. She didn't tell me to turn me against you. She wanted me to understand why you were so distant, that it wasn't because you didn't love us. The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. All those years believing he'd protected Sarah from his shame, when in reality, she'd been protecting him, carrying his burden silently, waiting for him to open up. I never deserved her, Thomas whispered. No argument there, Jennifer agreed, but her tone held no malice. She loved you anyway. Dr. Forrester approached, clipboard in hand. Mr. Wilson, we're ready to begin the transfer. I thought you might want to be present, to help keep the bears calm. Thomas nodded, grateful for the momentary reprieve from the emotional conversation with his daughter. Of course. Inside the shed, Thomas spoke softly to Grace, explaining as best he could what was happening. Dr. Forrester watched with professional interest as the bear seemed to listen, her eyes fixed on Thomas. Remarkable, Forrester murmured. Eduardo mentioned their unusual bond, but seeing it firsthand, there's something special about her, Thomas agreed. She's not just any bear. The examination revealed something unexpected, a small, partially healed scar behind Grace's ear, almost invisible beneath her fur. This bear was tagged, Dr. Forrester observed, gently parting the fur for a closer look. There's a faint number here, consistent with conservation marking, but it's an old system we haven't used in years. She consulted her tablet, searching through databases. Here it is. This bear was rehabilitated once before, nearly 7 years ago. She was a circus animal rescued from abusive conditions, rehabilitated, and released into the wild. Thomas stared at Grace with newfound understanding. She knows what it means to be helped by humans. Which explains her unusual level of trust, Forrester nodded. She's experienced both human cruelty and kindness before. The transfer proceeded smoothly. The cubs were placed together in one large carrier, while Grace required a specialized transport cage. Throughout the process, Thomas spoke reassuringly to them, stroking each cub one final time before they were loaded into the van. They'll be well cared for, Dr. Forrester assured him. Our facility has a success rate of over 85% for reintroduction to the wild. And given their unique circumstances, I'll be monitoring them personally. Will I "Can I visit?" Thomas asked hesitantly. Forrester smiled kindly. "Normally we discourage human contact during rehabilitation. But in this case, given the bond you've established, perhaps we can arrange something." She glanced toward where Sheriff Daniels had just pulled up in his cruiser. "Though I understand you may have other concerns to address first." Thomas nodded grimly. After signing the transfer paperwork, he approached Grace's transport cage one last time. The mother bear watched him through the bars, her brown eyes somehow conveying understanding beyond animal instinct. "Goodbye, old girl," Thomas whispered, placing his hand against the cage. "You take care of those little ones." Grace pressed her nose to his fingers in a gesture that brought tears to Thomas's eyes. As the van pulled away, Jennifer came to stand beside her father. They watched in silence until the vehicle disappeared around the bend. "What happens now?" Jennifer finally asked, glancing toward where Sheriff Daniels waited patiently by his cruiser. "Now I face what I should have faced 30 years ago," Thomas replied, a strange calm settling over him. The secret that had defined his existence for decades was finally exposed to the light. Whatever came next, jail, probation, public shame, felt almost secondary to the relief of truth. "I'll be with you," Jennifer said, surprising him by taking his hand. "Every step." Thomas looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He saw Sarah in her determined expression, but also something uniquely Jennifer, a strength and compassion he'd been too blind to recognize. "I don't deserve that either," he said softly. "Probably not," Jennifer agreed with a ghost of a smile. "But you're getting it anyway." Sheriff Daniels approached, his expression solemn but not unkind. "Thomas, it's time." Thomas nodded, squeezing Jennifer's hand before releasing it. As he walked toward the cruiser, he glanced back at his home, the house he'd built, the shed that had sheltered Grace and her cubs, the land that connected him to Sarah. For 30 years, this place had been both sanctuary and prison, keeping his secrets buried, but also keeping him isolated from genuine connection. Whatever happened next, Thomas realized he was finally free of the heaviest chains, the ones he'd forged himself. 18 months had passed since the day Sheriff Daniels drove Thomas away from his home. 18 months of legal proceedings, newspaper headlines, and whispered conversations that fell silent when Thomas entered a room. The judicial system had moved with surprising efficiency once Thomas had made his full confession, aided perhaps by Crawford's connections and desire for resolution. In the end, Thomas had received a 5-year sentence, reduced to 18 months with the remainder on probation due to his age, health condition, voluntary confession, and the unusual circumstances. Crawford hadn't pushed for the maximum penalty, something Thomas's attorney had found remarkable given the younger man's previous determination. Now, on a warm June morning, Thomas stood outside the minimum security facility that had been his home since the trial, a small duffel bag containing his meager possessions slung over his shoulder. Jennifer waited by her car, sunglasses shielding her eyes but not the nervous smile on her face. "Ready to go home, Dad?" she asked as Thomas approached. Home. The word carried complicated meanings now. During his incarceration, Jennifer had maintained his house, paying the property taxes from a joint account they'd established. Thomas had insisted on selling 10 of his 16 acres to cover his legal expenses, but had stubbornly refused to part with the remaining land, particularly the section containing Sarah's grave and the wooded area where he'd found Grace. "As ready as I'll ever be," Thomas replied, loading his bag into the back seat. The drive back to Pine Ridge revealed subtle changes to the landscape. New construction dotted the previously untouched hillsides, the first phase of Crawford's development, though notably scaled back from the original plans. The town itself looked marginally more prosperous, with freshly painted storefronts and increased activity on Main Street. "Place is changing," Thomas observed. Jennifer nodded. The resort project brought construction jobs. They're talking about reopening the old hardware store next month. And the environmental concerns Eduardo raised? Crawford hired a team of conservation experts to redesign the project. The resort's footprint is about half what was originally planned. The rest became the Pine Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary. Thomas raised an eyebrow in surprise. Crawford did that? Jennifer glanced at him. It was part of the settlement agreement with the EPA, but yes, he's been different since the trial, more involved in conservation issues. As they turned onto Thomas's Road, he noticed another change, a modest sign at the corner reading Bear Ridge Road, replacing the old county designation. Jennifer caught his questioning look. Town council renamed it 6 months ago, she explained with a small smile. Seems your bears made quite an impression. Thomas's heart quickened as his house came into view. Anna Reynolds stood on his front porch, waving enthusiastically as they pulled in. Behind her, a tall, lean man leaned against the porch railing. Michael. Thomas hadn't expected to see his son. Quite the welcome committee, Thomas murmured, suddenly feeling unprepared for this reunion. Jennifer squeezed his hand. We wanted to be here, all of us. The moment Thomas stepped from the car, Anna hurried down the steps to embrace him. About time you came home, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The place hasn't been the same without you complaining about the squirrels in your bird feeder. Michael approached more cautiously, extending his hand. Dad. Thomas took his son's hand, noting the firm grip, the expensive watch, the carefully neutral expression that couldn't quite hide the uncertainty beneath. You didn't have to come all the way from Chicago, Thomas said. I wanted to, Michael replied simply. Inside, Thomas found his house meticulously maintained, but subtly changed. New curtains hung in the windows, a freshly upholstered couch replaced the threadbare one he'd owned for decades, and the kitchen gleamed with appliances he didn't recognize. We may have taken some liberties, Jennifer admitted, following his gaze. The stove wasn't safe anymore, and the refrigerator was from the Reagan administration. And the couch was a health hazard, Michael added with the hint of a smile. Thomas ran his hand over the smooth countertop. You didn't have to do all this. Consider it 18 months of missed birthdays and Christmases, Jennifer said lightly, though her eyes were serious. They settled into an awkward rhythm as Jennifer prepared lunch and Anna recounted neighborhood gossip. Michael remained quiet, occasionally checking his phone but making a visible effort to engage. Thomas felt like a visitor in his own home, disconnected from the easy familiarity the others shared, evidence of bonds formed or strengthened during his absence. After lunch, Michael cleared his throat. Dad, there's something we need to discuss about the house and property. Thomas tensed. I'm not selling. I know you both think it makes sense, but actually, Michael interrupted, that's not what I was going to suggest. He withdrew a folder from his briefcase and spread several documents across the table. While you were away, Jennifer and I established a trust for your property. It ensures you can live here as long as you want, with maintenance and tax payments managed through the trust. Thomas studied his son's face, looking for the catch. And then? And then the land transfers to the Pine Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary with a permanent conservation easement. The house and immediate grounds can remain in family hands, but the forest where you found the bears will be protected permanently. Thomas sat back, genuinely surprised. This was your idea? Michael exchanged glances with Jennifer. It was a joint effort. Crawford's lawyers actually helped structure it. He has a similar arrangement for parts of his family's original property. Crawford helped with this? Thomas couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Jennifer nodded. He's changed, Dad. Or maybe he's finding his way back to who he was before hate and vengeance consumed him. Thomas stared at the documents, overwhelmed by the gesture and its implications. His children hadn't been plotting to move him into assisted living or sell his property for profit. They'd been securing his home and legacy. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Michael replied. "Just sign where indicated, if you agree." Later that afternoon, Thomas stepped outside alone, needing space to process the day's events. He walked slowly to the tool shed, empty now of its bare occupants but still holding the memories of those weeks when purpose had returned to his life. A vehicle approached on the gravel driveway, a familiar black SUV that made Thomas's pulse quicken. Maxwell Crawford stepped out, dressed more casually than Thomas had ever seen him, in jeans and a button-down shirt rather than his usual suit. "Mr. Wilson," Crawford greeted him with a nod. "I saw the cars. I gather you're home." "As of this morning," Thomas confirmed, wary but curious about this unexpected visit. Crawford glanced at the shed. "I'm not interrupting a family gathering, am I?" "They're inside. I just needed some air." Crawford nodded in understanding. "I won't stay long." "I wanted to give you something." He reached into his vehicle and retrieved a laptop, which he handed to Thomas. "What's this?" Thomas asked, taking it hesitantly. "Open it," Crawford suggested. Thomas did, finding the screen already activated and showing what appeared to be a live video feed of a forested enclosure. In the center of the frame, a large female black bear with a distinctive white chest patch lounged in dappled sunlight while 3 adolescent bears explored the area around her. "Grace," Thomas whispered, his fingers hovering over the screen. "And Scout, Rusty, and Princess," Crawford confirmed. "Dr. Forrester set up this monitoring system as part of her research. I thought you might want access." Thomas stared at the screen, then at Crawford, struggling to understand. "Why would you do this for me?" Crawford was silent for a long moment, hands in his pockets, gaze directed toward the distant mountains. "Hate is exhausting," he said finally. "I spent 25 years consumed by it, building my life around finding you, punishing you." "You had every right," Thomas said quietly. "Maybe. But what did it get me? A hollow success. An empire built on revenge that felt empty once I achieved it." Crawford turned to face him. "When I saw you with those bears, willing to go to jail to protect them, it reminded me of my father. He was like that, gentle with animals, always protecting the vulnerable." Thomas swallowed hard. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," Crawford agreed. "Better than I've been." They stood in silence, watching the bears on the screen. Grace appeared to sense the camera, looking directly into it with those intelligent eyes that had captivated Thomas from the beginning. "Dr. Forrester says she's remarkable," Crawford commented. "Her ability to navigate between wild instincts and human interaction is unprecedented in her research." "She was always special," Thomas replied, unable to hide the pride in his voice. "The cubs are nearly ready for full release," Crawford continued. "Grace has taught them well, apparently. Dr. Forrester plans to transfer them to the new sanctuary here next month. It adjoins your property." Thomas looked up sharply. "They're coming back here." Crawford nodded. "The sanctuary provides protected habitat with minimal human contact, but given their unique history, well, they'll be near enough that you might glimpse them occasionally from your property line." The implication was clear. Thomas might see Grace and her family again, from a distance at least. The thought brought an unexpected lump to his throat. "Thank you," he managed. Crawford shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "It's not for you, it's for them, and for the research program." But his tone lacked conviction. And as Crawford turned to leave, Thomas found himself asking the question that had lingered since their confrontation 18 months earlier. "Have you found it? What you were looking for when you tracked me down?" Crawford paused, his back to Thomas. Not what I expected to find, but maybe what I needed. He glanced over his shoulder. My parents would have forgiven you, you know. They were like that. My sister, too. And you? Thomas asked softly. I'm working on it, Crawford answered honestly. Some days are better than others. After Crawford left, Thomas remained by the shed, laptop open, watching Grace and her growing cubs. Jennifer eventually came looking for him. Was that Maxwell Crawford I saw leaving? She asked. Thomas nodded, showing her the laptop screen. Jennifer's eyes widened in recognition. Is that? Grace and the cubs, Thomas confirmed. They're coming back, Jen. To a sanctuary right next to our property. Jennifer studied her father's face, noting the animation in his eyes that had been absent since his return. Crawford arranged this? Seems so. Remarkable, she murmured. When this all started, I thought he wanted to destroy you. Maybe he did too. People can surprise you, Thomas said quietly. As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the yard, Thomas found himself drawn to the small family cemetery on the edge of his property. Sarah's grave stood beneath an old oak tree, the simple headstone adorned with fresh flowers. Anna's doing, most likely. Thomas lowered himself carefully to the ground beside the grave, his joints protesting the movement. Hello, old girl, he said softly, running his fingers over the engraved name. I've been away a while. In the gentle evening breeze, he could almost imagine Sarah's response, practical, loving, without judgment. She had known his darkest secret and loved him anyway, had tried to help him find the courage to face it long before circumstances forced his hand. The kids are here, he continued. Both of them. Can you believe it? Michael took time off work, says he's staying the weekend. A rustling in the underbrush caught Thomas's attention. At the edge of the woods, just visible in the fading light, stood a black bear. Not Grace. This one was male, larger, with no white chest patch. It watched Thomas with curious eyes, unafraid but cautious. Well, hello there, Thomas said softly. You new to these parts? The bear huffed softly, almost in response, before melting back into the forest shadows. Thomas smiled, turning back to Sarah's grave. Life goes on, doesn't it? Even when we think it's over. He placed his weathered hand on the cool stone. I think I'm finally learning what you tried to teach me all those years. As darkness fell, Thomas could hear laughter from the house. Jennifer and Michael sharing some joke, Anna's distinctive cackle joining in. The sounds of family, of connection, something he'd denied himself for too long. With a grunt, Thomas pushed himself to his feet. Better get back before they send a search party. He cast one last glance toward the forest where the bear had disappeared, then toward his home where lights glowed welcomingly in the windows. For the first time in decades, Thomas Wilson felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. Not gone, he would always carry his past, but bearable at last. Thomas Wilson's journey reminds us that it's never too late for redemption, connection, and purpose. Like many of us in our golden years, Thomas carried burdens from the past that isolated him from those who loved him most. His unexpected bond with Grace, a mother bear fighting for her cubs, awakened something long dormant in his heart. Through protecting this vulnerable family, Thomas finally found the courage to face his darkest secret and rebuild relationships with his own children. His story speaks to all of us who've wondered if second chances are still possible in our later years. They are. Whether it's reconnecting with a estranged family, finding new purpose when retirement leaves us adrift, or finally facing the regrets that have shadowed us for decades, it's never too late to begin again. Thomas discovered that true healing comes not from hiding our scars, but from allowing others to see them, and perhaps even help us bear their weight. Have you experienced an unexpected second chance in your later years that changed your perspective on life? Or is there someone in your life who deserves forgiveness, including yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters more than you know.